Hi everyone, this is Shannon Boucher from the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. I am on Parliament Hill and it's October the 21st, 2023. Now I came up to Parliament Hill today because of the Million4Children march that's happening not just in Canada but around the world. After the September 20th protests across Canada last month, we caught the attention of Gays Against Groomers in the United States, who announced that in 50 states they were going to mobilize people for a protest today, October 21st. And I'm on Parliament Hill. Now, because of events in the Middle East, the organizer here in Ottawa, Camille El-Sheikh, released a statement to other organizers that he was canceling the protest for today because of concerns about safety. I think the whole division based on things that are going on overseas is having an impact on the gender movement. It's certainly dominating the news cycle. I read a tweet this morning from Barbara Kay, a journalist, who said something to the effect, and I'll post it, that it's easier for people on the left to say gas the Jews right now than it is to say a man can't be a woman, which is quite terrifying. We've seen a significant exposure of the woke left for its overt racism and anti-Semitism, and I think that's contaminating the overall efforts here to get people together, and probably helpful. Today we're going to cover off some topics. Yesterday, Scott Moe in Saskatchewan passed the third reading of the Parents' Bill of Rights Act in Saskatchewan, which is a huge deal. I have yet to read it, but I'm going to plug it a little bit more in the segment for tomorrow's Canadian Gender Wars Report. Another major story this week is we've got a bunch of people coming from across the country to meet in Toronto. Scott Gieler from Nanaimo, who has been involved since early this year overtly in the pushback against gender after a local mom had to evict someone who identified themselves as a female, a man, from the girls' change room at the Nanaimo Aquatic Center. So hopefully I'm going to get some reports from Scotty later that I'm going to include. Last week we covered off Egale, Canada. Melanie and I had a conversation about an article that Eva Kurilova wrote. I had the opportunity to speak with Eva Korova this week, and we've got about a 15-minute segment conversation with her. I asked her a bunch of questions about her research into Egale, and from our conversation, because I've done some research into Egale myself, I feel like we've opened up a possibility to drill down deeper into the nature of Egale. I have a unique access to a public sentiment polling analysis artificial intelligence from a leading Canadian company that uses AI to track public sentiment. Their margins of error are narrower than the traditional polling methods and online polls that are being used by organizations like Egale, like Leger polling, which released about 10 days ago, and traditional polling methods used by Angus Reid. So I'm going to share some insights with you about sentiments around Egale, Canada, which is concerning and at the same time gives us a benchmark for where we currently are now. So we're going to have a bit of a mishmashed weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report this week. Some of it's going to be on location like I am today. Some of it's going to be remote video from friends of the show. Some of it's going to be interviews, and some of it's going to be drive by the rainbow protesters on Elgin Street in the next 20 minutes or half an hour. So stay tuned for the show. And I hope you have had a terrific weekend so far. Make sure you like and subscribe our channel. We are growing. Thank you to the new subscribers. We picked up a few last week, and very thankful for you taking the time to like the video and click that subscribe button. It helps us grow our channel. It feeds the algorithm to share, and I'm looking forward to reaching more and more people in this space. To kick it off this week, and I couldn't put up a Canadian Weekly Gender Wars Report without talking about Amy Ham. Amy Eileen Ham is a nurse, registered nurse from British Columbia, who back in 2021 put up a billboard in Vancouver along with Chris Elston, better known as Billboard Chris, I Heart J.K. Rowling. And it resulted in a bit of a dramatic scene in Vancouver City Council. The billboard was taken down within about 36 hours. It was almost immediately paint bombed and vandalized. And then Pattison Seaboard Advertising, I think, took down the billboard and citing hate speech, of course. Now, a couple of complaints were filed with the BC Nurses and Midwives Association against Amy Ham for her gender critical beliefs, or in other words, her beliefs that boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. Now, this is a nurse. She's a registered nurse who obviously studied biology and human physiology and anatomy in her nursing program. And one would think that in the medical profession that it would be important to be able to speak the truth about what a man is and what a woman is, especially considering safety of patients and appropriately diagnosing conditions and issues. Of course, nurses don't diagnose, but being able to treat people based on their biological sex rather than their stated gender identity has significant implications. Now, tomorrow, Amy Ham's hearings start again. Now, I say again because her licenses are on the line, and the BC Nurses and Midwives Federation is, they took her through September 21st to 23rd last year, 3 days, September 24th to 27th, another 4 days. So she's been in, I believe there was some in January as well, a few days of hearings. And now, if you think about it, or if you look at it, where's the dates? October 23rd to 25th, October 31st to November 3rd, October 6th to 8th. That's 3, 6, another 10 days of hearings on whether or not a woman can have a penis or not, I guess. This isn't just a case about Amy Ham, of course. A similar pattern has emerged of people filing complaints against professionals who are regulated bodies. And we've got the infamous case of Jordan Peterson, who has been he was being compelled to take social media training by the Ontario Psychological Association. So we'll wait and see what happens with Amy's hearings in the next couple of days. Previous hearings were you had to apply for a link to be able to attend the Zoom, and the numbers were limited. The BC Nurses and Midwives have made this an open hearing, so anyone can click on the link. I'm going to put it in the description of the video so that you can check that out yourself if you'd like to this week. Of course, this is going overtime, a bit like the Freedom Convoy trial for Tamara Litch and Chris Barber in Ottawa is going overtime. That's a little bit outside of our scope with the Canadian Gender Wars report, but certainly some of this craziness that seems right out of a Kafka novel from the 1920s and 30s should have people scratching their heads and wondering what the heck is going on with our professional associations and our legal system for that matter. Now, one of the people who is the lawyer on the other side of Amy Ham's trial is a woman by the name of Barbara Findlay. And Findlay is a lawyer who has been advancing trans rights in legislation and in jurisprudence since the mid-90s. We're going to dig in a little bit to Barbara Findlay in some future episodes of the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars. And for today, just know that Barbara Findlay is a somewhat infamous name in the gender wars in Canada for advancing absurdities into law and finding herself on other sides of bizarre cases where for example, a father was jailed for contempt of court for misgendering his daughter and for violating a publication ban around the identity of his minor child who underwent a gender transition a couple of years ago. Now, moving on to other things, we've got another infamous, let's move to Scott Moe in Saskatchewan. So this week we had on Friday the third reading of the Parents' Rights Bill passed in Saskatchewan. Moe exercising the notwithstanding clause, meaning that he circumvented or quashed the judgment of a court that attempted to hold off or to have an injunction against his gender pronouns policy. The Parents' Rights Bill, in part, says that children can't go and change their names and their gender identities at school if they're under the age of 16 and do so in secret from parents. So schools are going to have to inform parents about this if children are undertaking a social transition. A social transition means a change of appearance, the change of a name, and the change of gender identity, as well as pronouns in school. That is viewed as a profound and powerful psychosocial intervention for children. And countries around the world, UK being one of them, the Attorney General, I'm going to remember her name in a second, Suella Braverman, she was Attorney General last year, and she's changed roles. But while she was AG in the UK, she condemned the practice of social transition at school in secret from parents, told teachers that they would have a responsibility and a liability for doing this. And there is there's a lot of gray area here where there are no accountabilities whatsoever, allowing activist teachers to push trans ideology in schools. We know that policies in schools across the country are what is delivering, is the mechanism for delivering gender ideology, teaching children, absurdities, like the simple thing of Amy Ham standing up in Vancouver and saying men can't be women, men shouldn't be in women's prisons, etc. Biological reality is reality and not an activist position. But we're teaching children as young as kindergarten about pronouns and gender identity in schools under anti-bullying policy, under diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. And this gives an unfortunate power to teachers who might be activists to affirm children who express questioning about their gender identity. So a lot is happening in the landscape in Canada. Now, you may recall that a few weeks ago, Egale, which stands for Equality for Gays and Lesbians Everywhere. Egale is a quite heavily funded LGBTQ plus rights organization. It's been around for many decades, but over the last 15 years or so has taken a radical shift in its advocacy to push gender ideology, and in the case of Saskatchewan, to fund a legal challenge to Scott Moe's position on pronouns. Now, I'm going to cut to my conversation with Eva Kurilova. I had the pleasure of chatting with her this week. What you may not know, if you're fairly new to the gender wars in Canada, is both Amy Eileen Ham from Vancouver and Eva Kurilova from Calgary are co-founding members of CAUSBAR. CAUSBAR is Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights. And Egale was recently the subject of Eva's in-depth analysis on gender dissent. Melanie Bennett and I talked about Eva last week, and I was really fortunate to have a conversation with her. So let's see what she had to say. I'm here today with Eva Kurilova from Calgary. Eva and I met in person last spring when I visited Calgary and had the pleasure of spending a good part of an afternoon together. It's great to see you again, Eva. Welcome to the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you again, too.
Yeah, last week we mentioned you on the show because you put up a terrific piece in Gender Dissent about an organization called Egale Canada. Mm-hmm. And we touched a little bit on the work that you did, a really in-depth analysis of the organization Egale, how it started, I think really positive origin story, but then, kind of flipped over to the dark side at some point. How did you get interested in Egale? What twigged you to this?
So I'm not too sure how they initially got on my radar. I think that if you're involved in this conversation in Canada, you just sort of come across them, right? In the beginning of the piece, I put up that poster that they put in schools that talks about, women are women and men are men, regardless of sex. And I think that might have been the first thing I ever saw about them. And then it was the other ladies at Gender Dissent who sort of put me onto them. They were like, hey, that would be a really great topic of, for a piece. And I had that on the back burner for a while. I was working on a bunch of other stuff, but eventually I did start to dig into them. And I think I was even myself a bit surprised at just how huge they are, just how much funding they get, and just how much, how much influence they have. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got into them.
It's
mean, I mentioned to you before we started recording that I'd done some research and writing on Egale for a commission project that I worked on that's not going to be out for a few months, but I didn't go into the depth that you did. What was the big standout, or was there a holy crap moment when you were doing your research that really, really jumped out at you?
I think just the sheer amount of federal funding they get. Like, since 2017, I added up a total of over $10 million, which, other organizations I've looked into, like I've done a lot about the ARC Foundation, which does SOGI 123 in Western Canada. I think in terms of federal and provincial, they have at about 4 or 5 million, which is a lot. So I think I wasn't quite ready to see just how much Egale gets. Also another thing was just how much they are intertwined with Justin Trudeau. When I was looking, like, their first big gala that they had when he was still an MP, he was there. And then in 2018, they had another big event, the Identity Gala, and they gave him this award for his advocacy for, in 2S LGBTQIA stuff. And then I believe in 2022, they also boasted about how they had closed door meetings with him. So just the kind of their sheer just enmeshment in, like, the federal government and how much money they get and how much they, are in Trudeau's ear about all of this. And then they kind of turn around and, like, in current news, they turn around and they're suing Saskatchewan for the policy that they're trying to input. So to me, it was this kind of very almost imperialist, the federal government's giving them money, which they are using to pay their salaries and benefits. And then they turn around and try and tell provinces what to do. So that was sort of the big thing that I got out of that.
Not just that, but I applied for intervener status when Egale petitioned the CRTC to ban Fox News from distribution and cable packages in Canada.
Oh my gosh!
Earlier this year, and a few other people petitioned as well, and their argument coming from being laying claim to being the LGBTQSI, all the alphabet advocacy group, was that Fox News was, of course, homophobic and transphobic, and
right.
they've been hosting detransitioners and people critical of medical transition on the show.
Mm-hmm.
But they also are very unfriendly to Justin Trudeau. And so it seemed like there's this very, very cozy relationship, almost like Egale is an arm of the Liberal Party that's funded by the federal government, which is disturbing.
That's how it seems to me.
Yeah. How tight do you think that? I mean, you've already given us a little bit, but how tight is that relationship? Is Egale the primary organization in Canada that's pushing this? Is it the big?
I would say it looks like to me that it is. I'm not too sure who else would measure up to having just quite so much funding and quite so much pull with the federal government. So unless there's another huge one that I've missed, I actually think it is the main one that's doing this. There are others, like I said, there's the ARC Foundation. It's not just them, but they definitely have a lot of influence.
Yeah. I'm sure you've looked at Stonewall from the UK.
Mm-hmm. Not as closely, but
okay.
Yeah.
I did a presentation at a town hall with Scott Nugent in Windsor in September, along the timelines of the marches, along with my co-host Melanie Bennett. And Scott talked a bit about Stonewall UK, and the parallels are striking,
mm-hmm.
Particularly after the gay marriage. And this is kind of the end of a period of advocacy, a struggling organization financially, then suddenly adopts gender ideology as their flagship issue. I'm curious if this is just driven almost like this organization has this mandate to raise money and to be profitable, or to be a nonprofit that has a big budget and continues to grow, and that they're just using whatever kind of issues that trigger people, to donate and to elevate them in status and elevate them in funding. Is that kind of? Well, I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
I definitely do see them as chasing to grow their profits. over the years since 2016, which was kind of the earliest annual reports I had access to, they were consistently just getting more and more and more and more funding. COVID kind of made them take a hit, but it's always growing, and the percentage that goes towards their salaries and benefits is growing as well. So I think that, and they get, I mean, not just from the federal government, there's a lot of money they get from the government of Ontario as well, and from banks and from charities and everything like that. But it does seem like they're just sort of, my whole thesis was that they pivoted to trans in order to stay afloat, in order to continue making money. Because, back in, I think, 2007, they were really headed downhill. Like, their finances were not good. And so then they made that pivot. And before I even started writing this, I had this sense that probably something like that happened. I had no idea. I hadn't heard much about them. But I thought maybe at some point they pivoted. I was just surprised to see just how downhill they were going before they turned to trans, and then how lucrative it was since then. They found this new thing, and a lot of money started rolling in. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's my thought.
Yeah. I'm curious about. I didn't click through some of the links on the research that they had put up, but I think it was 2011, and there was a report on transphobia, homophobia, and
yes,
so-called hatred in the education system.
In schools, yep.
Did you drill down into that research and kind of have a look at the integrity of the surveys that they were doing? Or
I didn't look at the integrity of it, but yeah, they started doing that in 2007, and so basically, I think what I wrote was that they sort of used that as precedent. I think they said they found shocking levels of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia in Canadian schools, which is funny because this was around the time that I was in high school. So just from personal experience, not in my school anyway, it was a Catholic school. I'm sure it wasn't amazing for all gay kids going through school. But it's sort of, and they said they found those levels except apparently in schools with active gender and sexuality alliances. So, right. I didn't dig into how solid it was, but it's funny that they're like, oh, hey, except in these schools, it's totally fine. So that gave them sort of precedent to go in and like get into the schools and launch their Safer and Accepting Schools program to like spread that all over Canada. So I would have questions about that.
Are they behind the growth of the GSAs? GSA used to be Gay Straight Alliance, but now this is...
Now it's Gender and Sexuality Alliances, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were they sort of instrumental in pushing that out and advocating for GSA expansion in schools? Do you know?
Certainly. I'm not sure if I can say they were like the only ones behind it, because that already existed before they got involved. But, in response to this survey, they did launch like a website that was dedicated to pushing this stuff in schools. So I'm sure, I can't say exactly the extent to which they were influential, but I'm sure that they did have a big role to play in that. Definitely.
Fascinating. Did you look at their all the missing threads report that they did in the spring? Did you dig into that one?
I'm not sure. I don't think I saw that actually.
So they did a report called, I think it was called Missing Threads.
Okay.
And I'll share an image for viewers.
Yeah.
And they claimed that up until May of this year, there was thousands of incidents of hatred against trans and the LGBT community in Canada. And when I read the report, it's basically mean tweets.
Oh, great! Yeah.
Right, or disagreement, or parents at a school board who are criticizing books in libraries and things like that. So they framed hatred in a way that is sensationalist and histrionic, to be quite frank, in order to play the emotions of the public. And I think to solicit funding and to justify their existence.
Yes, because that's what they're doing.
Just like organizations in the States, like the I think it's the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League have become. I should be careful with that, but there's organizations that we used to think stood for free speech and for the rights of people they profess to protect, and they're basically making up the hatred now in order to, by redefining what hate is, in order to continue to justify their existence.
They are, and which is interesting because this is a tidbit I didn't include in the article, but I found an old article from back in the 2000s where actually Ezra Levant of Rebel News he was praising Egale for being pro-free speech. He was like, oh, even the homosexuals know that free speech is important because that's how they got their rights. And he kind of just did a little article about how like they support even people dissenting who don't agree with same-sex marriage and all this. So I just kind of thought that was interesting how they've sort of changed since then, and now they're being histrionic, and now they're releasing these reports about all this hatred everywhere just to sort of shut up, dissent and to shut up disagreement. So they've sort of done a 180 in more ways than one.
Yeah. Now, if I remember correctly, I subscribe to Gender Dissent. Is that article available freely, or do you have to be a subscriber?
Freely, yeah. You can just go to the website. It's the latest one up right now. It should be at the top of the page.
And what other projects are you working on? You have your own Substack, Eva Kurilova.
Yes, I've got my own Substack. So I write for Gender Dissent. I do more in-depth reports like this, like follow the money type of thing. I have my own Substack where I publish 2-3 times a week, just stuff about the gender wars and things like that. I also write for a wonderful Substack called The Distance. It's the Substack of LGB United, and I love what we do there. Me and a few other writers, we do a lot of like journalistic stuff, but also a lot of historical analysis. I've really dug into just the origins of the trans movement, and I argue a lot that it really did not come out of the gay movement. Of course, you can draw some parallels, but that's what I do. And I've done some articles for Redux as well, which is fantastic publication.
Redux is really doing great
stuff.
stuff.
So here and there, they'll kick me a story, and I'll do that as well. So
awesome. Now, can you reveal a project you might be working on and give us a hint about what's coming up from Eva Kurilova?
Right now, I'm looking for my next big thing for Gender Dissent. Nothing too huge. Just things coming up for my Substack. Some stuff about my private life. It's going to be a private post, so you'll have to subscribe to see it. But nothing too big on the horizon. I'm just keeping tabs on what's going on in Saskatchewan. Right now, I've got a piece in the works. They've got that bill with the pronoun policy in schools, so I'm really, really keeping my eye on that. I'm watching that. So that'll be kind of the next big sort of report that comes out. Yep.
Terrific. You've been doing this now you mentioned speaking out for about 4 years.
Yes, and writing for about 2. Yeah.
Well, your contribution has been great. For viewers, Eva did a great investigation of the ARC Foundation, which is the organization that's behind SOGI 123 in British Columbia. And SOGI, of course, has moved quite quickly into Alberta, which I'm sure you're tracking now. And Eva's analysis of ARC and kind of the machinery and the people behind it is a fascinating read. So we're really thankful for the work that you're doing. And thanks so much for joining me here today to give us an update on Egale.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you may have noticed that I am flying solo this week on the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My co-host Melanie Bennett is actually flying today on a little journey, and we will have a return of Melanie in a couple of weeks. And I wanted to finish off today's show. Today's a bit of a shorter segment than we've done in the recent past, where Melanie and I have been getting into some really depth analysis of some policies and what's going on behind policies in schools specifically, and in the gender wars in terms of queer theory and neo-Marxism and some of the woke ideology that's permeating this whole thing. Now, I want to run through some of the Million4Children march across Canada. There was some interesting, and I'm just going to shoot and share some video with you from various places across the country and some images as I'm talking here, because we've seen, I think, as I said at the beginning of the show, that this protest has been muted for a number of reasons. One of them is the conflict in the Middle East. As you may be aware, a big part of the energy going into the Million4Children and Hands Off Our Kids movement on September 20th was the Muslim community in Canada. Of course, with the violence in Israel and Gaza right now, there are divisions. I got notes from a Toronto protest yesterday that some of the parents and people that were going to the gender protest at Queen's Park were then going off to do another protest to do with, Gaza and anti-Israel. And so that's created some tensions, some uncertainties, and a lack of cohesion in the October 21st protests. But nevertheless, there were events across the country. An image surfaced from Nanaimo, Parksville, and Vancouver Island, where a man who was counter-protesting assaulted a woman, putting her in hospital. What I understand was that he put a flag up in her face, or a sign up in her face, and then he punched through the sign, striking her in the head. This is the peace and love crowd. This is the group of people who are claiming to be all anti-hate and about inclusion, and the level of exclusion they're willing to exercise for people who disagree with them is sufficient that we're seeing violence at some of these protests. Karima Saad, the lawyer, political satirist from the GTA, was at Queen's Park yesterday, and there's some comical things going on. I had the opportunity to have breakfast with Karima the day after the trial started for Chris Barber and Tamara Litch here in Ottawa, and we talked about kind of all things going on. She gave me some insights into her approach, and she's not for everyone's palate, but she did say to me something that stuck in my mind, is that she likes Mexican wrestling. And all of this seems to her like theatrics of Mexican wrestling. And so she's joining in the theater of these kinds of events. And here's a short video of Karima engaging with rainbow protesters in Toronto.
Back off.
You're not serious. You approached me.
Back off.
This is a public park.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back off.
These guys want to see my face, see my face. I don't care. I'm not afraid of you. That's good. Okay. This is what I'm afraid of. They have the right to talk, and they have the right to. Well, I'm not stopping them from talking. I'm in fact broadcasting what they're doing. I thought you didn't threaten me. I can't hear you. It's hard to dialogue with beating of the drum, but we're going to take a walk around to see what's going on. So we have kind of a perimeter around the statue, flags, signs, umbrellas. It is drizzling a little bit, so the umbrellas are at least sensible.
A friend of the show and active parent, Jessica from DDSB Concerned Parents, had a conversation with Bahira Abdusalam, also in Queen's Park yesterday, about the contribution and about the efforts to raise awareness of this.
Of mine, Jessica from
DDSB Concerned Parents.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining and for your support. It was great to get in touch with you and to meet you and to have all the support and to know about the efforts that you have been doing for helping the children and taking care. So tell me, what do you think about what happened today?
You know what? I think it's been a great day, and they weren't expecting us to use some of the same chants, things like that. And I think that, you know, a lot of parents got the word out there that we're done with all of this.
So what do you think about the numbers? That they were way more in numbers than us? So
No.
how did you feel? Like
No, I felt like it was actually, I would say it was fairly even maybe towards the end we had more people
Okay.
than they did in the end.
Yeah.
You know, our people were a little bit later coming, and that's okay.
Yeah, so it is not like
It's not even
I
about
know,
numbers.
Yeah, I know today there were like other protests and many people went there, and however, it was very important that we will be here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
To be consistent and not to leave the space for counter protesters to come and say like we are leading and we are there. No, we shouldn't. We should be protecting this movement and we should be working towards our goals
Yep.
consistently.
And that's why the march is marching back here, and they will be back here to take the space again shortly.
Oh, okay.
And as you can see, all the counter protesters already left. They don't want to be here anymore for some reason. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay.
success.
This was great. Thank you so much.
See you later.
Nice to meet you. Bye.
Jess has been part of a group of founding contributors to a project called the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada. And over the last couple of months, we have been developing a white paper, a statement of principles, collaboratively, as well as a vision and mission for the organization. That organization is going through a governance formation procedure. We're looking for a board of directors to contribute to the project. Signatories to the Parents' Rights Coalition policy statement, the principles that we have, and we're gonna tie in some things to do and information that we have to do with artificial intelligence. Now, I've been working on a project for the last 2 years since Chanel Fall and I and Chris Elston were mobbed by about 300 people in Ottawa to try and understand what's happening with the gender movement, the gender cult, with gender indoctrination online. And we've used a very sophisticated artificial intelligence set of algorithms by a leading Canadian AI firm that specializes in consumer behavior, market research, and public sentiment and public opinion polling for politics. I won't name the organization to avoid any kind of blowback that might occur, since I'm paying for their services, but we're able to get some significant insights in what's going on online with gender ideology and with opinions around gender identity in schools. Now, I put up a tweet thread this week on the 16th, and you can have a look. I'll share some screenshots actually of that tweet series. I set this up. We asked the AI, and our iteration of the AI we call Miley. Miley is the Norse god of travelers. It translates as mile stepper or traveler himself. And we asked Miley the question before deploying him into digital space on Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. And we looked at let's see how many. There were 14,800,000 tweets and or posts, engagements related to the question, how do I know what my gender identity is? And there are a number of different answers that come up around this question. 14 million posts, 3 topic areas that came up. Gender identity was a subset, 32% engagement, gender non-conforming, 23%, and gender dysphoria, 21% of the total of those that conversation were sort of the 3 major buckets or 3 major classifications of the conversation online. When I go to the thread, Miley gives us a breakdown from 4.8 million posts. 65.1% of those posts said gender identity does not determine gender, whereas 34.9% said gender identity determines my gender. Now, we look at the detailed stance positions. That means what position in the argument or what position in the discussion are people taking. And we have, again, I said 65%, their stance is that gender identity does not determine my gender. We get from the pro-gender side, about 14% of people, and we see that number come up over and over again. 14%. We saw 14% in the Angus Reid poll. It's the number of percentage of Canadians that feel it's appropriate that schools should keep secrets about gender transition from parents. And the quote here of 14%, gender identity is a deeply personal and inherent part of every person's identity. It's not determined by stereotypes or societal constructs. Recognizing, therefore, and understanding different gender identities is important for creating an inclusive and accepting society. And on the other side of this argument, the majority of posts express the opinion that gender identity is a pseudoscientific concept that undermines the importance of biological sex and reinforces stereotypes. Many argue that there are only two sexes and that gender identity is a subjective belief based on societal constructs. They believe that the concept of gender is a lie and it should not be taught or promoted in schools. Now, we talked a little bit about, or heard from Eva about Egale Canada, and we have some results from Egale. When I ran an opinion survey, I asked Miley, tell me what people think about Egale. Now, when we get to Egale, we see that Egale has a tremendous amount of public support. 21.6% in the conversation about Egale. So this is Canada. This is from October 19th, 2013 to present, 2023. So a 10-year slice of history, 38,000, almost 40,000 posts online. That would be mainly Twitter. TikTok is more recent, as well as Reddit included there. So out of 40,000 engagements, 22% I support LGBTQ rights. 60% I think funding for Egale is necessary. 2.8% I think funding for Egale is unnecessary. And 16% of the total conversation, Egale is doing a great job promoting education. When I drill down a little bit on opinion around funding and financial support for Egale, 95.5% of engagements online say that Egale funding is necessary. So this is a useful tool, and we have the ability to track this conversation over time. Now, I'm curious now, I'm going to share this graph. You'll see this on the screen. April 1, 2023 was a big spike, beginning of April this year, in Egale traction online. And that corresponds, I believe, to the release of their missing threads, so-called research, where they diluted the meaning of the word hate. I hate green peppers. It's about the only thing that I hate in the world. And maybe you hate different foods yourself, or trivial things like this. But the way that they throw around the word hate is diluted to the point of almost absurdity, and the claims that they make are really quite striking. So for next week's show, I'm going to run a closer or a shorter time window on opinions around Egale to see if there's any change recently in the perception of this organization. Why don't I finish off this week with some videos and some photos, a little montage about what's been happening across the country. I was hoping to hear from Scott Giller. Scott I had understood was coming to Toronto for the Queen's Park protest. Something came up. Scott was trying to get t-shirts printed for resale to do with the march, and he had paid for the cost of printing of these shirts, and all the graphic design was done, and then the organization refused to print the products that he had purchased. And last I heard, Scott actually hadn't received his money back. That may have impacted his ability to come across the country. I did get some notes from him and see some social media posts about some issues in Nanaimo and on Vancouver Island. So it seems like he stayed there. Hopefully I can chat with Scotty this week and get an update on what's going on with him. As I let the images finish out the show, I remind you again to like and subscribe. Please share the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. We'd love to get questions from you. And if you have questions for Miley, the AI, about what people are thinking around the issue of gender in Canada, put them in the comments or send me a DM on Twitter, send me a note on Facebook if we're friends, or reach out by email. I'm going to be providing some more information sessions about Miley and the AI and how we can use that in the Canadian Gender Wars to understand the people who are in opposition to us, as well as how the public is feeling about this. I'll finish off and I'll slice in the Paper Tiger March and some thoughts on the Ottawa protest. I hope you have a terrific week, and we'll see you again next Sunday for the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report.
Stand for human rights. 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 Stand for human rights.
And this is it, folks.